I knew something was wrong the moment my manager called me into his office without making eye contact. He didn't even wait for me to sit before he started lecturing me like a child. "We all make sacrifices for this company," he said, pacing like he was building up to some emotional speech. "But you didn't show up to my daughter's birthday dinner. The entire leadership team was there. And you? The senior logistics analyst? Missing." He paused dramatically. It shows a lack of commitment. At first, I thought he was joking. I actually laughed. But then he slid a termination letter across the desk. Fired. For skipping his daughter's 8th birthday party. I stared at him, stunned into silence. I had spent the last 7 years optimizing the operations that kept our entire $2.5 billion nationwide logistics chain running like a well-oiled machine. I'd slept in warehouses, eaten dinners out of vending machines, pulled double shifts, fixed system crashes at 3 a.m. But one birthday party, one that wasn't even work-related, was apparently enough to erase all of that. He kept talking, something about team culture and showing loyalty, but I didn't hear a word. I only heard the roar of anger settling into something sharper, something cold, calculated, and dangerous. And the thing he absolutely forgot in his dramatic little performance was the part where I, and I alone, owned the master access credentials to the routing optimization engine that powered the entire company's interstate freight network. The system I built. The system I maintained. The system I warned them, not once, not twice, but 8 times, needed a backup administrator in case I was ever unavailable. The system they ignored because you'll always be around. Well, not anymore. I walked out of the building quietly, no scene, no shouting. I didn't take anything from my desk except a flash drive containing my own personal files. I didn't access a single company system, I didn't have to. My work contract had already spelled out exactly what belonged to them and what didn't. And ironically, their refusal to assign a secondary administrator wasn't just incompetent, it was negligent enough that removing me with no transition plan triggered a massive compliance flag the very moment I clocked out. By the next morning, that little oversight would become a catastrophe. It began with a phone call at 6:12 a.m. I didn't answer. The second came at 6:14. Then 6:18. Then 6:25. By the time I finally checked my phone, I had 12 missed calls, 7 urgent texts, and an email marked critical, response required. I scrolled through them with the calm curiosity of a man checking the weather. Overnight, the routing system had attempted its first automated optimization cycle without me. With no one authorized to approve or override dispatch changes, the system defaulted to safety lockout mode. Freight didn't move. Trucks didn't roll out. Carriers didn't receive instructions. Warehouses went into hold. By sunrise, the entire Western region's distribution chain froze. Every hour cost the company roughly $4.3 million in delays, penalties, and rerouting fees. And that was before their East Coast hubs woke up and realized they too were locked out of the network. At 7:02, my manager called again. I let it go to voicemail. At 7:04, the COO called. Then the VP of Operations. Then the CEO. Eventually, they started texting things like, "Please, we just need your login credentials and can you walk us through a reset process?" And my personal favorite, "Let's put the past behind us and be professionals." Professionals. Right? They wanted professionalism now that their empire was collapsing under the weight of their own arrogance. By 9 a.m., the company had to announce an internal state of emergency. By noon, major retail partners were calling legal counsel. By 3 p.m., the CFO issued a statement declaring system failure and unexpected administrative loss. Funny how my firing was suddenly rebranded as an administrative loss. I didn't respond to a single message. Not because I was being spiteful, but because I had no obligation to fix the damage they chose to cause. They fired the only person who knew how to run the system that kept them alive, and they did it for something as childish as not attending a birthday dinner. Natural consequences, that's all. They weren't entitled to my time, my labor, my expertise, or my rescue. The next morning, they escalated. A courier showed up at my house with a letter offering me a consulting contract worth far more than my yearly salary, just to come in for one day. Behind it was a second letter from HR attempting to rescind my termination pending further review. The desperation seeped through every sentence. But I had already made my decision. After everything I'd given them, after the humiliation, the disrespect, the years lost to a job that never valued me, it wasn't my responsibility to save them from themselves. So I sent one final message. Not to my manager. Not to HR. Not to the CEO. To the entire executive board, you fired the wrong person. Good luck. Then I turned my phone off and went outside, breathing freely for the first time in years, as a $2.5 billion logistics empire continued crumbling without me. By the third day, the fallout had grown so large it practically shook the entire industry. News leaked, of course it did. Drivers stuck idle at depots started talking. Warehouse supervisors complained. Retail partners demanded answers. And somewhere along the line, someone muttered the truth to a journalist. They fired the only guy who knew how the routing system worked. By afternoon, the headline hit the logistics trades, major freight network paralyzed after sudden staff termination. I read it while eating takeout on my couch, one leg crossed over the other like I was catching up on casual weekend reading. Meanwhile, the very people who once scolded me for being too dedicated to the technical details were now being asked by reporters to explain the system they never bothered to understand. Spoiler, they couldn't. At 2:16 p.m., the CEO finally dropped the corporate mask. He emailed me personally. No greetings. No signature. Just a raw, panicked paragraph. We are facing catastrophic losses. Please contact me. We'll undo everything. Name your terms. Name my terms. It was surreal. Yesterday, I was an expendable nobody who lacked team spirit. Today, I was the only thing standing between them and financial ruin. But the truth was simple. In the quiet space between losing my job and watching them self-destruct, something inside me had clicked into place. I finally understood my worth. I finally understood my power. I finally understood how foolish it would be to hand that power back to the same people who took advantage of it. Still, curiosity got the better of me. So when Jordan, from the tech implementation team, texted asking if we could talk, I agreed. Jordan was one of the good ones. We met at a little diner off the highway. When he walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. He slid into the booth and pressed his palms to his face. "Dude," he said through his fingers, "they're done. Completely done." I raised an eyebrow. "Already? You don't understand." He lowered his hands. The system failure triggered automatic breach notifications. Half our partners have the right to pull out of contracts if service stops for more than 72 hours. Guess what tomorrow is? I sipped my coffee. 72 hours. He nodded miserably. The board is furious. They're talking lawsuits. People are resigning before they get fired. The COO had a meltdown in front of everybody. And Mark, I leaned forward. My manager? Jordan swallowed. He tried to blame the firing on HR. HR pulled the email receipts. He tried to argue you were being difficult. The board didn't buy it. He's gone. Effective immediately. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt nothing. Just calm. They want you to come in, Jordan said quietly. Just to walk them through restoring access. No, he looked up, startled. No? I owe them nothing, I said. They didn't lose a system, they lost respect for the one person who ran it. Jordan exhaled hard, nodding. I figured you'd say that. Honestly? Good. They deserve this. We talked for a little while longer. About work. About burnout. About how corporations pretend people are replaceable until they suddenly aren't. When we finished, he shook my hand like he was shaking the hand of a man who walked out of a burning building without a single scorch mark. As I drove home, the realization settled over me fully. I wasn't the villain of their story. I wasn't even the hero. I was simply the consequence. And they created me. By the next morning, the company's collapse was no longer a possibility, it was a timeline. At 9:03 a.m., 3 major national retailers executed their contractual right to withdraw. Without their volume, the company's freight density shattered. Routes became unprofitable overnight. Insurance carriers reevaluated their risk exposure. Lines of credit froze. By noon, the board held an emergency meeting. By 12:17, they released a public statement calling the outage a malicious internal incident. By 12:18, the internet called BS. Screenshots circulated. Former employees chimed in. Drivers. Dispatchers. Engineers. People from every corner of the empire emerged with stories that overlapped perfectly. The company had fired the only person capable of keeping the routing architecture alive. And now the entire corporate machine was choking on its own arrogance. Around 1 p.m., the CEO tried calling me again. Then texting. Then emailing. Then even messaging me on LinkedIn with a paragraph that looked like he wrote it while hyperventilating. Please understand the gravity of this. We are willing to offer full reinstatement, a significant salary adjustment, and retroactive compensation. We must resolve this. Reinstatement. Salary adjustment. Retroactive compensation. All of that for a birthday they claimed I had no right missing. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat in my living room with the blinds half open, watching a sunbeam stretch slowly across the carpet as the world kept spinning, calmly, effortlessly, while a $2.5 billion corporation strangled itself. By late afternoon, the board folded. Their last move was their most desperate. They publicly fired the entire top management tier, labeling them responsible for operational negligence. The CEO was out. The CFO was out. The COO, who once lectured me for insufficient emotional investment in office culture, was escorted out by security. They threw every sacrificial lamb they could find into the fire, hoping it would reverse the damage. It didn't. Because the truth was simple, they hadn't lost a workforce problem. They had lost the one person their entire digital spine quietly depended on. And the only reason that dependency existed was because no one else bothered learning what I built. The next day, as the industry watched the company hemorrhage money and market share, a new email arrived. This time from a competitor. They didn't threaten. They didn't beg. They didn't lie. They wrote, "We heard what happened. We'd like to talk on your terms." My terms. 2 words I had never heard from anyone in management before this week. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow, deep breath. Not triumphant. Not vengeful. Just free. Maybe I would join them. Maybe I would consult. Maybe I would take 6 months off and go sit on a beach somewhere. For the first time in years, my future wasn't linked to somebody else's approval. The company that fired me for missing a birthday had destroyed itself trying to cover the mistake. All I had done was watch. By the end of the week, the company's downfall became a case study. Articles popped up everywhere: business journals, tech blogs, even a few mainstream outlets that normally never cared about logistics unless a cargo ship got stuck somewhere. They all told the same story: a multi-billion-dollar empire crumbled because its leadership couldn't handle being told no. My phone buzzed constantly. Former coworkers reached out, not with pity, but with a kind of awe, like they were watching someone walk away from an explosion in slow motion without looking back. Some of them admitted that after I left, the office felt different, quieter, more nervous, like everyone sensed the adults had left the room and the children were playing with knives. A few asked if I did it intentionally. Others asked if I had planned revenge. One asked if I felt guilty. I told them all the same thing: I didn't do anything. They fired the only person who knew how their system actually worked. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't sabotage. It was gravity. You drop the wrong piece, and the whole thing collapses under its own weight. One evening, as the sun dipped behind a row of old pine trees outside my window, I found myself smiling, not out of pride or spite, but out of relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without waiting for someone else's meeting request to choke the air back out of me. And then, unexpectedly, a message arrived, not from a recruiter or executive, but from one of the drivers. A guy who used to bring his daughter to the warehouse on Saturdays because he couldn't afford childcare. A guy who always seemed one paycheck away from disaster. His message was simple: thank you. Whatever happens next, they can't treat people like that anymore. I stared at that message longer than I expected. Because maybe that was the real ending, not the CEO getting fired, not the collapse of a billion-dollar operation, not the offers piling into my inbox. Maybe the real ending was that the people who kept the machine running finally had proof that leadership wasn't untouchable. That incompetence at the top could have consequences. That someone could walk away and the truth wouldn't stay buried. As the sky darkened and the first street lamp flickered on, I closed my laptop and leaned back. I didn't need revenge. I just needed out. And somehow, without trying, I became the reminder that sometimes walking away isn't surrender. Sometimes, walking away is the move that topples the king. By Monday morning, the final blow landed. The company, once a giant in the industry, a fortress no one thought could fall, filed a preliminary notice of restructuring. In corporate language, that's the polite way of saying, we're collapsing and praying investors don't flee before we finish the paperwork. They blamed unexpected systems complications. They blamed transition oversights. They blamed leadership miscommunication. They blamed everything except the truth. They fired the wrong person for the pettiest reason imaginable. And the system they depended on me. When the news broke, I was sitting at a quiet cafe, sipping a cup of coffee I actually had time to enjoy, watching the world move on without any expectation that I'd fix something by noon. A soft ding alerted me to a new message, this one from my former manager's replacement. A last, desperate attempt. It read, "We understand you may be hesitant, but the board is willing to offer a full compensation package, lifetime consulting contract, stock options, and complete autonomy in system operations. We need you." They needed me. 7 years of being told to work faster, stay later, be more of a team player, and stop getting hung up on the technical details. 7 years of carrying systems on my back while executives played golf and scolded me for not attending enough social events. Now, suddenly, I was irreplaceable. Funny how crises reveal the truth people pretend not to see. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish them. Not because I wanted to watch them drown. But because I finally understood, just because other people fail to see your value doesn't mean it isn't there. It just means you're in the wrong room. When I got home, I checked my voicemail. A message from my old warehouse supervisor, one of the genuinely good people, said, "Everyone's talking about what happened. You should know, the drivers, the night crew, the dock workers. They're on your side. Always were." It meant more than he realized. That night, I opened the message from the competitor, the one offering to talk on my terms. For the first time since I was fired, I felt a spark of excitement instead of dread. Not revenge, not pettiness, just possibility. Before responding, I stepped outside, letting the cool evening air wash over me. The neighborhood was quiet, lights glowing softly behind closed curtains, the world steady and peaceful. The logistics empire that fired me was collapsing in front of the entire industry. And me? I finally felt like I had stepped into my own life again. Tomorrow, I would start something new. Something better. Something I chose. Sometimes losing your job is the worst thing that can happen to you. And sometimes it's the moment you finally walk away from a world too small to contain you. 2 months later, I found myself sitting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking a busy port, one of the largest on the West Coast. Not as an employee, not as a subordinate, not as the guy quietly keeping a broken system afloat while executives held birthday dinners. I was there as a consultant. Independent. In control. Sought after. The competitor who reached out had offered me something the old company never even pretended to acknowledge: respect. They didn't want me to be a cog or a miracle worker. They wanted my mind, my expertise, my vision for how a modern logistics ecosystem should actually function. And, because they understood leverage, they offered a rate that made my old salary look like pocket change. As I walked their team through the architecture of a scalable, efficient routing system, one that didn't hinge on a single point of failure, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Authority. Confidence. Belonging. Not because I needed control, but because I finally had the space to build something without being undermined by insecure managers or out-of-touch executives. During a break, the head of engineering handed me a tablet. On the screen was an article from a logistics publication: "Former giant officially files for bankruptcy protection after unrecoverable operational failure." Below it, CEO and CFO face potential investigation for negligent oversight. And then, the part that hit harder than the rest, because it was honest, sources confirmed the company's collapse began after the abrupt termination of their senior routing architect, who managed critical systems single-handedly. They didn't name me. They didn't need to. Anyone who mattered already knew. The head of engineering watched me read it and said casually, "You know, your old company could have been untouchable if they treated their people better." I nodded. "A lot of places could." He hesitated, then added, "You don't seem happy about it." I thought about that. Am I happy? Relieved, maybe. Vindicated, sure. But happy? I set the tablet down and answered honestly. I didn't want them to fail. I just wanted to stop being the only thing keeping them from it. He nodded like he understood completely. Later that night, as I stood outside the new building, staring at the cranes loading containers under floodlights, I felt it fully. The chapter with my old company wasn't just closed. It was irrelevant. They were a cautionary tale now, a reminder that arrogance is fragile and competence is priceless. But I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I wasn't thinking about the collapse or the headlines or the messages I still received from former coworkers. I was thinking about the future, my future. No more scrambling to fix problems caused by leadership ego. No more being punished for imaginary offenses. No more sacrificing my life for people who thought I was disposable. Now I chose my projects. I chose my clients. I chose my worth. As I walked to my car, keys in hand and a calm smile on my face, a single truth settled over me with perfect clarity: they fired me for missing a birthday. but firing me cost them everything. And walking away gave me the life I should have had all along.